Chapter 8. Back to Life. Once again, Jayden found himself sitting on a bench, waiting, while the powers that be decided his fate. The building in front of which he sat appeared to be a stable, but showed no signs of ever having been used as such. Just something to make the warriors feel more at home, he supposed. There were a few rocks to throw, at least, but even that small joy was muted by the strange lack of feeling in his hands. And it was extremely disconcerting when he discovered, after turning his head away for only a moment, that the small rock would once again be back in its original place. He decided that perhaps he was happy to be going back to the world of the living, after all. Now if they would only agree on a course of action, he could be on his way. It had been a long time since his physical body had rested in the world of the living, and he was a little worried about it. He had no idea how he was supposed to transition back, or what to expect when it happened, and no one had been of any help at all when asked. Their minds were completely focused on planning the departure route, though Magharine did tell him just enough to make him afraid without really explaining anything. Somehow, the spell she had placed on the pill he ingested without question had removed his spirit from his body at a time when he did not need it, during his captivity. He had been partially dead for at least a full day as he lay in his cell and not even known it, which could account for some of his memory loss from that time. Now his body was alive, she said, in Druania, but deprived of the sustenance it needed to survive. He supposed he should be grateful for being spared some of his suffering in Heisenthor's dungeon, whatever the risks, but the unsettling explanation did nothing to help him prepare for what was to come. The deliberations had continued for what felt like hours since he had wandered off. Everyone had been ignoring him, for the most part, so he waited for a convenient moment and managed to slip out of the meeting unnoticed. He did not really want their attention anyway, with his head still reeling from the bizarre knowledge about his heritage, not to mention the emotional turmoil of the previous day, or so. And he had only just come to terms with being alive again. There was a lot to think about, and now that he was finally alone where he could clear his head, it still seemed like too much. Just then a woman approached with a distant look in her eyes. At first he thought she would pass by without acknowledging his presence, but she stopped not far away and turned a somber stare in his direction. She was petite, with long dark hair hanging down nearly to her waist. About 10 years older than he was, in appearance at least. Something in her expression spoke of a great weight bearing down on her. "Hello," he greeted her, not wanting to be rude.
"I was murdered,"
she told him.
"by my husband, in that little cabin in the woods. The one with the white window panes, and the apple tree just outside the door."
"I am sorry," he replied awkwardly.
"There is peace in nothingness. There is peace in the caves. I must hide in the caves."
The woman turned and walked away, leaving him to stare after her in consternation. She was one of the holdouts Grodin had mentioned, he was sure. He wished there was something he could do for her, but he had no idea what. There were others he had noticed, men and women, walking forlornly by themselves with no apparent purpose or destination. He was ashamed to admit it, but in a strange way they made him feel better about his own predicament. There was a chance for him, however small. These spirits were beyond hope. He rose from the bench, deciding to make his way back to the meeting chamber in the main hall, as the building at the rear of the keep was called, to see if anything had been decided. As he was about to round the corner of the stable-like structure, he heard voices and stopped. A loud grunt gave the speaker away as Grodin. He did not mean to eavesdrop, but could not help hearing what was said.
"Dangerous for you as well. The past is best left in the past, where it belongs."
"Of all my order, I have the least to fear from this realm,"
said a voice that was unmistakably Magharine's.
"I have long studied the dangers it poses to the living."
"And you think that makes you immune to them?"
She began to respond, but Grodin cut her off.
"Save your offended retorts for those who are affected by them. Don't forget that if not for me, you would still be fawning over those visions of your youth. powerless to help us now when we need you most.
How dare you?
I pulled you away and brought you back to us, and what thanks have I ever got? None. Don't want none neither. I know it's hard, this isolation you've chosen, but the Droka need you. Take my advice and stay away from the past.
Jayden felt like he was intruding on a private conversation, but he could not interrupt now with emotions running so high. He could politely turn around, of course, and yet...
I did not choose this.
Her voice was quieter now, seething.
He
asked and you accepted. You did not have to.
Yes, I did. I would do anything.
I know,
Grodin said, his voice softening.
He's a stubborn fool, if you ask me. We all deserve a second chance. None of my business, though. This place is my business, and you're too important to this place to lose now. Things change. You, of all people, know the truth of that even better than I do.
He paused.
Might as well come out here, Prince. It is time we were on our way.
Jayden was not surprised that Grodin knew he was there. If everyone in Druania sprouted wings, he did not think it would startle him overmuch at this point. He rounded the corner, only slightly abashed, to face the pair. Magharin's eyes were damp, but her intense gaze never wavered.
You have a difficult road ahead of you,
she said to him. Her enigmatic tone made it unclear if she was speaking of the journey from Druania or events beyond. Either way, she seemed completely unruffled by his appearance. Had she known he was there as well? He wondered. I am ready, he said simply. The pair shared a look in which he was sure something was decided, but had no idea what.
Perhaps you are at that.
Too much remains to be seen, and I fear that time grows short.
Magharin brusquely wiped a tear from her cheek, as if it was a fly that was irritating her.
The war between the thoughts intensifies. Even in the outside world, they must see the signs. You have an important role to play in this, Prince, as a keeper of one of the stones. I would not let you out of my sight if I could help it.
I will set things right in Crysin, he said, with much more confidence than he felt. My family is loved by our people. I will not be alone. When things are settled, perhaps we will meet again.
We will meet again, Prince.
Her tone became suddenly menacing, and her robe began to glow.
You are in this now, and once you are in, there is no way out.
The look she gave him was that of a judge addressing the condemned. Grodin placed a hand on his suddenly trembling shoulder, pulling him away.
Come on, then,
the long-dead warrior said with a note of determination.
The others are waiting.
The Witch Queen's words haunted him as they proceeded to the main hall, where a group of nearly 20 warriors had assembled on the front steps. Minora stood beyond them, alone in the shadow of the entryway. Grodin excused himself and went to her, leaving Jayden alone with the company. Fawny, the larger of the two female warriors, looked him up and down appraisingly. "You're a handsome one," she said, "a bit bony for my taste. But still, if I was alive, I just might have my way with you." The others had a good laugh at the comment, until the scar-faced Harster shot Fawny a grim look, which meant that he turned his head in her direction.
We'll thank you not to bring up the desires of the flesh, Fawny. We have enough to think about without your distractions. Besides, I am sure he would prefer someone a little closer to his own age.
"Forgive me, young one," Fawny said to Jayden. "I have only been dead for 100 years or so. I still remember things these ancient do-gooders have forgotten. We Nitirans believe that the afterlife is what you make of it, and I choose to keep my desires with me." A few of the warriors nodded their heads or gave a verbal agreement. Harster snorted.
Nitirans are in such a hurry to get to the afterlife. I'm surprised any of you had time to experience the pleasures of living.
There were a few chuckles at that, but a good portion of the party seemed to be made up of Nitirans, who muttered their disagreement or ignored the comment. Jayden knew something of the land of Netiro, far to the east, from his tutoring. They were a blunt people, dedicated to the annual war against the demons, who otherwise kept mostly to the confines of their island home. When they did trade with the other nations, it was mostly fish from the Netiran shoals caught from canoes in their specialized nets. They offered fair exchanges and refused to come down once they had set a price. It was said that Netirans bargained with their eyes, and usually got the price they wanted. They claimed the Protector as their king, though it was a title to which the man himself gave little heed. The bladed staves they fought with were an approximation of the legendary weapon given to the Protector by Father Alamon. How I wish that weapon had been there when my home fell, he thought, not for the first time, and the legend with it. Where is he? Has he abandoned us? The destruction of his home was not the Protector's fault. He knew squarely on whose shoulders that blame lay. Soon enough I will face you, Grisland. And then what? Then he would die, most likely. But still, I will face you. The group was eyeing him curiously, as if expecting him to say something, or perhaps just making their own appraisals of him. Though he felt like a newborn gazelle among a pride of lions in this group, he supposed he should do his best to fit in. I am sure she is trying to distract you, Master Harster, he said. I have heard that if it is possible for a Netiran to make a job more difficult, they will do so. Harster roared with laughter.
That about sums it up, lad. The boy has spirit. Perhaps he's worth risking our eternal necks for, after all.
It's not his spirit I admire, said Fawny, closing in on him. We do make things harder than they need to be, boy, and we do it for good reason. Mortal life is only a training ground for the afterlife. You would do well to remember that. This group is made up of Netirans because we are strong. The Netirans voiced their agreement with a battle cry so fierce that he took an involuntary step back from the sudden outburst. The den ended suddenly, and he was left facing the glares of the Netiran warriors. Their stares were intense, challenging. Where others would use a horse to plow a field, she continued, we do the work with our hands so that we become as strong as the horse. Where others would hunt with a bow, we hunt with a knife so that we become as agile as the stag. Others pass into oblivion, while we stay and fight. Where will you go when your mortal days are at an end? Tell me that. Wherever the thoughts send me, I suppose. It was clear from her wicked smile that it was exactly the answer she had expected to hear. Ah, but do the thoughts not reward those who help themselves in life? I have heard it said that they do. What then do you suppose are the rewards for those who help themselves in death? I don't know. Of course you do not. That is the blessing, or the curse, of mortality. At some point we must all embrace the great mystery. So why then travel to the afterlife ready to give yourself to the wind? It is not such an easy thing to go to the great ones when you die. Most are helpless as lambs when they come here, and they depend on warriors like us to keep the way open for them, to lead them to the light. She inched even closer, looking squarely into his eyes. She was as tall as he was. What do you think would happen if we were not here, young prince? I don't know, he said again. If we were not here, then they would get you. You mean the demons? They are here too? Oh yes, they are here. But they are not the pathetic creatures that come through the gate in Sidion once a year and attempt to cross the split. Those are slow and clumsy, dazed from having to conform to the rules of our world. The ones that aren't killed would die on their own, eventually, unable to survive the foreign climate. But this realm is neither theirs nor ours. We are equally out of place here. And if they catch you here, they might just take you to the afterlife of their world. What that is like,
We do not know. No one who has ventured there has ever returned."
A loud harumph announced the presence of Grodin.
"She don't just mean to frighten you, lad,"
he said.
"It is something you must know before we leave. You will be in danger today. Do as I say, though, and you'll come out alive. Let's move."
There was little talk as Grodin led them to a small round room at the back of the main hall. A hatch in the floor was lifted to reveal a staircase that wound steeply down and out of sight. Fawny gave Jayden a mischievous smile as she descended second, directly behind Harster. Grodin motioned him to follow after half of the warriors were through. It had to have taken at least an hour to reach the bottom, where they emerged into a rounded tunnel that shot off in both directions. It looked too smooth to be natural, but did not appear chiseled either. "Who made these tunnels?" he asked.
"Calalon, the mountain herself, made them, with her own fiery blood. They were discovered by the first Aelfar, so long ago that no one remembers exactly when. The staircase was made by Droka during the migration."
"It must have taken them 100 years to tunnel up all that way."
"They used magic, boy."
Magic. There had been far too much magic in his life lately, little of it good. Now there was magic in his own family. In him. No, the magic is in this stone of fire, not me. Somehow that was easier to accept. It was fine for a rock to contain magic, but something else entirely to have it coursing through him. Magic was for mages, dragons, and mysterious figures from the past. It was a source of fun for the imagination of children who were pretending to battle demons or cause lightning storms. When mixed with reality, it was terrifying. Margarine said there were 5 stones. It was magic from one of the stones, wasn't it? That's what they used to make the staircase.
"Wondered when you'd get around to figuring that out. Not that it's any of our business, but yes. The Droka are dependent on Spekovia, a big opal they guard with their lives. It is sacred to them, makes their whole world possible. Without it, they would not have their little lights, which means nothing would grow inside the mountain, and they wouldn't have any food. They would be eating worms and dirt in the dark down here."
Meru is their lore master, Jayden reasoned. Does he control the magic from the stone? Grodin nodded.
"And if he were to die, his son Guan would take control. Quiet now. We must not speak for the next while."
"Why?"
"Because of the Guardians."
Grodin gestured ahead to where a long line of stone statues stretched into the distance on either side of the cave. The Guardians were carved in the forms of various animals: bears, wolves, badgers, dragons, tigers, unicorns, and some that Jayden did not recognize. Their features were incredibly lifelike, down to the sculpted muscles bulging from their life-sized frames. Each one was ferocious and foreboding in feature, poised as though ready to strike. "What are they?"
"Warriors, like us. Had their spirits encased in stone to protect the Droka, in case they were ever in serious danger."
Jayden was horrified at the thought. Couldn't they just protect them as you do?
"The temptation to ascend to the thoughts is great. They didn't trust themselves to stay, and felt their task was too important to abandon. So they did this to ensure that they would never give in to that temptation. Because of their sacrifice, they will one day be allowed to affect the physical world again, briefly, if the need arises. They are at peace when they rest, but when disturbed, they long for freedom. Our voices haunt their dreams, reminding them of the lives they left behind. I made them a promise long ago not to wake them unless the cause was great. I would not break that promise."
"You knew them?"
"They were my friends. Quiet now."
The party made its way down the long tunnel in silence. After a while, Grodin gestured for 2 of the Natirans, their names were Jordan and Royson, to go ahead of them. Royson looked younger than most of the others, with rosy cheeks and an easy smile, while Jordan appeared older and more stern. There was a quick flash of white, and they were gone. Jayden's eyes threatened to bulge out of his head when it happened, but he managed to maintain his silence. He knew that the rules were different here. He had first-hand experience with that, but the speed they moved defied all logic. There were so many questions he wanted to ask, and now he was not even allowed to speak. After a time, the rows of statues ended, and the tunnel narrowed until they were forced to proceed in single file. The walls closing in reminded him of his experience in the little shaft he had squeezed into to avoid capture from Heisenthor's followers, and he found that he had to control his breathing to keep from panicking. The feeling subsided a bit when he thought of how good it would feel to be outside again. Eventually, the tunnel widened back out before ending in a second round room with stairs leading up. Muted natural light streaming down from above indicated that they had reached the end of the underground realm of Druania. He could almost taste the air outside of the mountain, his depression suddenly a distant memory. The company stopped at a loud grunt from Grodin, and the warriors began to talk amongst themselves, letting him know that it was okay to break his silence. "Why are we stopping?" he asked.
"We wait,"
replied Grodin.
"Crysin and Jordan should be back soon to let us know if the way is clear."
He had a million questions, but was getting tired of sounding ignorant. Grodin surprised him by speaking first.
"Pipe tobacco."
"What?"
"That's what I miss the most. Good old pipe tobacco. The flavour. Sometimes I look at the fields the Droka grow in here and I can almost imagine the smell. Great farmers, the Droka. Maybe the best I've ever seen." "Ale,"
said another voice.
"Ah,"
Grodin sighed.
"ale."
"I'll tell you what I miss most," said Fani, her eyes again focused intently on him.
"Save it, woman,"
Grodin grumbled.
"We all know what you're going to say."
It was a measure of respect that she kept silent. Her smug smile did not alter, however. Harster joined them, his scar appearing especially wicked in the new light. Jayden wondered briefly if the grizzled veteran's eye patch was really necessary in the afterlife, but decided that Harster probably maintained it out of politeness. He certainly had no desire to see what was beneath.
"Dice,"
the misshapen warrior added.
"I've been whispering in one of the Droka's ear to make some for about a year now, but I don't think the fellow quite grasps the concept. The closest he came was a square granite box with fish eyes carved on one side."
"Isn't that an invasion of their privacy?" Jayden asked. Harster shrugged.
"Doesn't hurt 'em. We're here to protect 'em, and we do. No harm in having a little fun while we're at it. Nothing else to do."
"That's the truth of it," Fani agreed. "Of course, when we ascend—"
"We had better be treated like kings,"
Harster finished. The warriors all had a good laugh at that, while Jayden was too busy contemplating the implications.
"Sorry, lad. I was low-born. Didn't have the castle upbringing you did. We peasant folk speak our minds. We don't learn enough words to wrap things up all nice and pretty in 'em. Those born with wealth and privilege get the better part of the deal in the physical realm." "Aye," replied Grodin. "But if they don't have brains enough to enjoy it, what good is it? The miserable will be miserable, no matter their position."
This was a debate that he was well groomed for, but he had learned the dangers of discussing politics with strangers at an early age. Besides, most philosophies were at least partially true, and he figured it would not do anyone here any good to hear his views on taxation and wealth distribution anyway. "Where are we going, exactly?" he asked, steering the subject to the matter at hand.
"Dogmar, the wizard's fortress, or thereabouts,"
Grodin replied.
"Alamon and the Brotherhood will know how to deal with Grislin's treachery. Keep your head on a swivel, mind. It is a dangerous trek through the crystal, alive or dead, and I would be hounded to no end if I didn't see you safely to the other side."
Jayden already had a healthy respect for the Crystal Woods, having lived his entire life in their shadow. Only a fool would take their dangers lightly. He preferred not to traverse them alone even in the daylight. Wandering them at night was suicide. Everyone in Crysin had been warned at an early age that if they were ever to venture into the forest, they must be safely indoors or gone by nightfall. He had somehow convinced Matthias to approach with him at night once, just to the fringe. The sounds they heard had tied their bellies into knots, and they had not even made it past the tree line.
"Those two should have been here by now,"
growled Harster.
"I know,"
Grodin agreed.
We can't wait. The boy needs to get back. If they ran into trouble, I trust they'll have sense enough to steer it away from us. In line. Stay sharp.
The company quickly resumed its orderly formation, and Harster started cautiously up the steps. Jayden eagerly took his place behind Grodin, anxious to see what lay ahead. He felt a rush of adrenaline as he thought of what being outside again would feel like. He imagined it would feel like freedom. The steps soon ended, and they emerged into a tangled mass of roots belonging to the most enormous red oak tree he had ever seen. The twisting tendrils made an effective canopy that they could peek out of, but that anyone outside would have trouble seeing into. No exit was visible. "What now?" he whispered.
Now we hope that whatever trouble Crysin and Jordan ran into isn't waiting for us as well,
replied Grodin as he reached out and grasped one of the roots. The surrounding tangle began to slither silently away, revealing a small break in the gnarled wall. "More magic."
"Be on your guard,"
Harster said low.
"Something don't feel right."
The party emerged from the root tangle into a little clearing before a small footpath that ran off at a steep downgrade, with a sheer cliff face above. Below the trail, a thick clump of oaks, interlaced with nasty-looking briar bushes, covered a drastic muddy slope strewn with the occasional uneven slab of rock. There did not appear to be any breaks in the mass of trees and thorns. "Little wonder no one has ever found the Drokul far. From this entrance, at least. A goat would have a hard time getting up here." It was a little disappointing to see that the landscape outside of Benwi Druania still appeared as muted as it did inside, but his joy at the small glimpse of sky more than made up for it. In contrast to the lack of clarity that nearby physical objects displayed, the sky was so vivid that it nearly took his breath away.
"Don't get too comfortable. You're not home yet,"
Grodin remarked. "No, but it still feels good." The old warrior smiled an awkward smile, the rarity of it making it that much more sincere.
"I'm sure it does, lad."
They descended the narrow path carefully. Loose shale covered the trail, but it did not seem to shift under their feet as it normally would have. He was wondering whether the sun, which had to be close to cresting the trees in the world of the living, would be different here when the first wave of nausea hit him. He stumbled.
"Easy, boy."
Grodin caught his shoulder.
"You can still hurt yourself here if you're not careful. The injury won't affect your body, but it'll tear at the fabric of your mind."
I felt a little dizzy, that's all." Grodin eyed him thoughtfully.
"Damn,"
he swore, turning to shout at Harster.
"She said it might wear off early if we didn't hurry. We need to move."
They picked up the pace, reaching the base of the cliff without further mishap. A low buzz had begun to grow in his ears, and everything looked fuzzy. He smacked his lips. Had he been thirsty before? He couldn't remember. The path soon ended. There was no trail leading directly through the forest, so they wove back and forth through the trees and brambles as they made their way onward. Harster seemed to know where they were going by instinct. The woods were eerily quiet. Not so much as a jackrabbit stirred. They came into a clearing, and Grodin stopped unexpectedly, causing Jayden to run into his back. "Sorry." Grodin did not reply. Peering ahead to see the cause of the sudden halt, an icy chill ran through Jayden's veins. Standing on the opposite side of the clearing was a creature that he could not have imagined in his blackest nightmares. The buzzing in his head had turned into a slow pounding, as if someone was inside and wanted out. Am I hallucinating? Black scales that devoured light covered the demon's massive human-like form. Its face was eerily beautiful, a mockery of youthful perfection as void of humanity as a mask. Muscles rippled the length of its body, bulging overripe as though in danger of bursting. The beast was the embodiment of vanity. Full lips twitched upward at the sides into the semblance of a smile, if a smile could portray cruelty, malice, and insanity all at once. The dark eyes were as expressionless as the grave. A man knelt beside the creature with his head slumped down onto his chest. "What is it?" he whispered as soon as he was able to find his voice.
"Vindale,"
Harster spat.
Demon General. Haven't seen one since the Illusion Wars. Nasty things. Smart, too.
A slender blade as blinding as the reflection of sun on snow appeared suddenly in Grodin's hand. He held it casually, merely a tool he intended to use for a menial task. There was not the slightest hint of fear in his eyes.
Remove yourself,
he cried,
or taste eternal nothingness.
A penetrating rattle filled the air. The Vindale had not opened its mouth, but no other creature could have made that sound. The hideous beast reached down and grabbed the kneeling man by the hair, pulling his head back. It was Royson. Vacant eyes stared at nothing, while a slack mouth hung open. It had been Royson. The soul that once inhabited the form was gone. The husk that remained made the eyes of the murdered girl who Jayden had met, the holdout, appear lively in comparison. A wind rose from nowhere, and a single voice that seemed made up of 1,000 tortured souls whispered harshly to him from inside his skull.
Beware, the Adim come. Beware, the Dora Dim come.
Then Jayden noticed for the first time the figures slithering on their bellies through the trees. There were dozens of them, maybe more than 50. Blood-red scales reflected the low light. Powerful arms used in tandem with massive tails propelled the lizard-like beings onward. Flicking tongues tested the air as if they could taste their prey. Their claws looked every bit as sharp as the Droka's, but longer. The warriors immediately formed a protective circle around him, not waiting for the order. The creatures hung back when they reached the party, waiting for the ones behind to swell their numbers. Their eyes twitched uncertainly at the glowing swords and bladed staves that had suddenly appeared in the warriors' hands. Enormous white wings shot out from Grodin's back, blasting all around with gusts of wind from their fluttering. Matching wings sprouted from the other warriors as well, forming a wall between Jayden and the seething mass of demons. Grodin stepped toward the Vindale. When he spoke, his voice was low and deadly.
Call them away and let us pass,
he told it,
or I will snuff the twisted spark that your motherless masters embedded in your foul form for all eternity.
An eerie laugh tinged with madness filled the air, and a blade as black as Grodin's was white appeared in the Vindale's hands, darkening the already dim light of the forest.
Your soul will lead the tainted when I take you, mighty Grodin,
the Vindale hissed.
Don't let their claws touch you,
Harster whispered to Jayden.
They'll damage your spirit sure as metal damages flesh. A true strike can leave you a hollow shell, wandering aimlessly, trying to figure out who you are. Stay in the circle if you value your sanity. The wounded don't last long in this war.
Everything seemed to happen at once after that. The forms that were Grodin and the Vindale collided in a whirl of glowing white sparks, moving so fast that he saw them only as blurs of light and dark. The circle of warriors moved into the mass of red-scaled demons, pulling him along with them. Through breaks in the circle, he saw claws and fangs attempting vainly to reach through, only to be repelled by the quick flashes of light that were the warriors' weapons. Shrill screeches filled the air. A warrior went down, and the circle tightened. Jayden's head felt like it was trying to separate from his body. The whole scene began to grow even fuzzier. Then, from out of nowhere, a ball of white shot down from the treetops, and for an instant he saw the form of Jordan, the lost scout, streaking toward Grodin and the demon general. Then he tripped and went down, a wave of exhaustion crashing over him. A loud roar was building in his ears. The forms of the warriors and demons became as transparent as the shadows, and the surrounding trees began to solidify. Then the ethereal figures became shadows, the long morning shadows of the surrounding wood. The roar slowly faded, replaced by an incessant shrill chirping. A sparrow, perched above him on a narrow branch, greeted the crisp new day with his song, cocking an eye at the strange creature who had suddenly appeared from nothingness. Breath came to him in short gasps, and he blinked his eyes to accustom them to the new light. All traces of the intense battle that had raged around him were gone. Digging his hands into the cold, muddy soil to verify that it was real, he thanked the great thoughts for his freedom. His immediate concern was for Grodin and the other warriors. Hoping it would make things easier for them now that they did not have him to look after, he said a quick prayer that they would make it safely back to their home inside the mountain. His next concern was for himself. Small patches of old snow dotted the landscape around the hollow in which he had materialized, and the trickle of early spring runoff was everywhere. Icy water from the damp ground was already soaking into the thin clothes he had procured from the Drokol Far, chilling him to the bone. A strong wind from the north did nothing to help matters. The cold and the mud gave him brief flashbacks of his unpleasant stay with the sorcerer. With a shiver, not entirely from the temperature, he decided that his first order of business was to get to a lower elevation. Rising wearily, he surveyed his surroundings. The woods appeared much as they had before, west slope red oaks and pine with a scattering of undergrowth, only brighter. The rising sun was a welcome sight, even if it would take him time to adjust to the glare. His stomach growled. He was not sure which he could use more, sleep or a hot meal. Both would be preferable. An indentation in the ground caught his eye. The outline of an enormous footprint was clear in the mud, made by something barefoot and massive. Looking about, he noticed more of them. He remembered a certain fishing trip to Winthorn Lake, when he had gone scouting with his father. They had come upon a set of fresh tracks identical to these. The footprints could only mean one thing. There were trolls nearby.